What if some of the most honest, emotionally devastating war films ever made weren't American and weren't loud? In the aftermath of World War II, British cinema quietly produced a cycle of war dramas that rejected hero worship and spectacle. These films focused on fatigue, fear, guilt, and survival. Tonight, we're counting down 10 overlooked 1950s British war dramas worth rediscovering, starting from the bottom. Number 10. Angels 1-5, 1952. Most Battle of Britain films sell the myth first and the men second. Angels 1-5 does the opposite. Instead of turning RAF pilots into icons, this film treats them like exhausted professionals trapped in an endless cycle of sorties, funerals, and replacements. The story follows a single squadron, but the real subject is turnover, how quickly faces disappear and how little time there is to mourn them. There's very little melodrama here. Pilots arrive, learn procedures, fly missions, and sometimes don't come back. Others are reassigned. New men take their place. The film's structure reflects this brutal routine, emphasizing how war erodes individuality. Even victories feel muted because another scramble is always minutes away. This approach feels startlingly modern, especially compared to later, more triumphalist WWII films. The aerial combat is cleanly staged but never fetishized. Dogfights are chaotic, brief, and often confusing, mirroring how real pilots described combat. What lingers instead are the quiet moments on the ground. Men trying to sleep, drinking too much tea, cracking jokes that barely hide the tension. Authority figures aren't grand commanders, they're administrators managing human attrition. What makes Angels 1-5 overlooked is precisely what makes it powerful. It doesn't offer catharsis. It doesn't build to a rousing final stand. It simply shows the system grinding forward, indifferent to individual courage. In that sense, it feels closer to lived experience than legend. This is not a film about winning the Battle of Britain. It's about enduring it, and that distinction is why it deserves rediscovery. Number 9. Morning Departure, 1950. Few war films understand suspense the way Morning Departure does, because it knows that waiting can be more terrifying than fighting. The entire film centers on a British submarine trapped on the seabed after a collision, with its crew sealed inside as oxygen dwindles and rescue becomes increasingly uncertain. There are no battles, no enemies on screen, only time. The genius of the film lies in its restraint. Confined sets create a suffocating atmosphere, but the tension comes from small details. Malfunctioning equipment, whispered calculations, men realizing what they won't say out loud. Leadership is tested not by heroics, but by composure. The captain must project calm even as the odds grow worse, because panic would be fatal. What separates Morning Departure from later submarine thrillers is its emotional intelligence. The crew isn't a collection of stereotypes. Each man responds differently to confinement. Some cling to routine, some retreat inward, some grow reckless. Conversations drift toward home, unfinished lives, and quiet confessions. The film understands that when death feels close, people don't always make speeches. They remember ordinary things. Technically, the film is meticulous. Naval procedures, rescue logistics, and chain-of-command dynamics are portrayed with documentary-like seriousness. This realism grounds the drama, making the situation feel painfully plausible. The absence of music in key moments amplifies the silence, forcing the audience to sit with the same uncertainty as the crew. Despite its quality, Morning Departure is rarely mentioned alongside great war films. Perhaps it lacks spectacle. Perhaps its tension is too internal. But for viewers who appreciate psychological realism and slow-burn dread, this is one of the most honest depictions of wartime survival ever put on screen. Number 8. The Small Back Room, 1949. Often grouped with early 1950s war realism, The Small Back Room is one of the darkest British films ever made about World War II, and one of the least comfortable. Instead of frontline combat, it focuses on bomb disposal, and instead of heroism, it examines self-destruction. The protagonist is a brilliant explosives expert who has lost a leg and numbs his pain with alcohol. This is a war film about damage that doesn't end when the sirens stop. The enemy bombs may be defused, but the psychological toll remains. The film depicts bureaucracy, condescension, and public ignorance as constant pressures. Civilians celebrate success while specialists quietly unravel. The contrast is brutal and intentional. Director Michael Powell uses expressionistic visuals to place the audience inside the character's fractured mental state. Shadows loom, rooms feel distorted, everyday objects take on menace. The most famous sequence, an extended bomb disposal scene, plays like a nightmare, stretching time and amplifying fear until the act becomes almost unbearable to watch. What makes the small backroom extraordinary is its refusal to soften its protagonist. He is bitter, arrogant, self-sabotaging, and deeply wounded. The film insists that war heroes can be unpleasant people, and that their suffering doesn't always translate into dignity. Number 7. Above Us the Waves, 1955. Most naval war films focus on massive ships and broadside battles. Above Us, the Waves goes in the opposite direction, centering on one of the strangest and most dangerous chapters of World War II. British midget submarines sent into enemy harbors to cripple German battleships. It's a film about precision, patience, and men operating in near-total isolation beneath the sea. The drama unfolds slowly and deliberately, mirroring the nature of the mission itself. These operations weren't fast or heroic in the traditional sense. They required absolute trust in engineering, training, and teamwork, because once submerged, there was no margin for error. The film captures this through procedural detail, equipment checks, silent rehearsals, and repeated drills that emphasize how much preparation goes into a mission that might last only minutes. What makes Above Us the Waves quietly compelling is its respect for professionalism. Characters are not defined by speeches or bravado, but by competence. Courage here is calmness under pressure. The tension comes not from enemy fire, but from claustrophobia, mechanical failure, and the knowledge that escape is unlikely if something goes wrong. Visually, the film avoids flashy effects. Instead, it uses confined interiors, dim lighting, and long stretches of silence to create unease. When action does occur, it feels sudden and brutal, exactly as described in real accounts of midget submarine warfare. Number 6. The Purple Plane, 1954. Long before terms like combat fatigue entered public conversation, the Purple Plane confronted the emotional wreckage left behind by air warfare. The film follows an RAF bomber pilot reassigned to Burma after the death of his wife in an air raid. Though physically capable of flying, he is emotionally numb, detached from danger, duty, and even survival itself. Rather than staging constant action, the film leans into atmosphere and internal conflict. The Burmese landscape is lush and deceptively peaceful, creating a stark contrast with the character's inner desolation. Missions are flown, but the real tension comes from the pilot's indifference to whether he lives or dies. This emotional withdrawal makes him dangerous, not just to himself, but to those flying beside him. The film is remarkable for how directly it addresses trauma. There is no dramatic breakdown, no inspirational speech that fixes everything. Healing is slow, uneven, and uncertain. Relationships form tentatively, not as romantic subplots, but as fragile lifelines pulling damaged people back toward meaning. Aerial sequences are brief and functional. They exist to advance character, not thrill the audience. What lingers instead are conversations about loss, guilt, and the feeling that war has already taken everything that mattered. Number 5. Orders to Kill, 1958. If there is a British war film that completely dismantles the idea of moral clarity, it is Orders to Kill. This is not a battlefield story, but an espionage drama centered on a single mission: assassinate a suspected collaborator in occupied Europe. The simplicity of the order is precisely what makes the film devastating. The protagonist is young, inexperienced, and deeply uncomfortable with the task assigned to him. As he embeds himself in the target's life, doubt creeps in. Is this man truly guilty, or merely surviving under impossible conditions? The film forces both the character and the audience to confront a terrifying truth. War often demands irreversible decisions made with incomplete information. There is no glamour here. Espionage is shown as lonely, paranoid, and morally corrosive. The closer the agent gets to his target, the more human the situation becomes, and the more unbearable the mission feels. The tension builds not toward action, but toward inevitability. What sets orders to kill apart is its refusal to judge. It does not excuse collaboration, nor does it simplify resistance. Instead, it presents war as a system that compels individuals to commit acts they may never psychologically survive. Number 4. The Battle of the River Plate, 1956. At first glance, the Battle of the River Plate looks like a traditional naval epic, but its power lies in how deliberately it avoids spectacle. Instead of treating combat as a fireworks display, the film focuses on command decisions, timing, and the psychological strain of responsibility. This is a war film about calculation, not glory. The story dramatizes the first major naval engagement of World War II as British cruisers confront the German pocket battleship Graf Spee. Rather than building to non-stop action, the film unfolds like a chess match at sea. Captains weigh risks, study intelligence, and make choices, knowing that every decision could cost hundreds of lives. This methodical pacing creates a tension that never relies on explosions to feel urgent. What makes the film especially compelling is its respect for professionalism on both sides. The German crew is not demonized. Their competence is acknowledged, which heightens the stakes and reinforces the idea that war is often a collision of disciplined professionals following orders, not caricatures of good and evil. Number 3. The Sea Shall Not Have Them, 1954. Most war films focus on destruction. The Sea Shall Not Have Them focuses on retrieval, specifically RAF air-sea rescue crews tasked with finding downed pilots before exposure or exhaustion kills them. It's a subtle shift in perspective that transforms the film into a meditation on endurance rather than combat. The narrative follows multiple rescue missions, each emphasizing uncertainty. Planes vanish. Coordinates are imprecise. Weather turns hostile. The sea itself becomes the antagonist, vast, indifferent, and relentless. The rescues are rarely triumphant. Often, crews arrive too late, forced to confront the limits of effort and technology. What gives the film its emotional weight is its emphasis on routine heroism. These crews are not chasing medals. They are doing exhausting, repetitive work with little recognition and high emotional cost. Success is measured not in enemies defeated, but in lives pulled from the water, sometimes just in time, sometimes not. The film avoids melodrama, letting restraint do the heavy lifting. Dialogue is sparse, performances are understated. The result is a tone that feels painfully authentic. Number 2. Ice Cold and Alex, 1958. Ice Cold and Alex is not about battles. It's about getting through. Set during the North African campaign, the film follows an ambulance crew attempting to cross the desert while pursued by enemy forces and slowly stripped of strength, water, and hope. The journey itself becomes the war. The desert is filmed as an oppressive force, vast, blinding, and indifferent. Heat replaces gunfire as the primary threat. Every mile drains the characters physically and emotionally. Tensions rise not because of explosions, but because exhaustion makes patience impossible and trust fragile. What elevates the film is its refusal to simplify its characters. Class tensions surface, prejudices emerge. Civilians and soldiers clash in moments of desperation. Yet survival forces cooperation, creating uneasy alliances that feel painfully real. The film understands that war compresses human behavior, bringing flaws to the surface alongside courage. The famous final scene, quiet, restrained, almost anticlimactic, perfectly captures the film's ethos. Number 1. The Cruel Sea, 1953. If there is one British war film from the 1950s that strips away every trace of romanticism, it is The Cruel Sea. This is not a story about winning battles or outsmarting the enemy. It is a story about endurance, about the slow psychological erosion that comes from months and years spent escorting convoys across hostile waters, knowing that failure means invisible death beneath the waves. Set during the Battle of the Atlantic, the film follows Royal Navy officers tasked with protecting merchant ships from German U-boats. What makes the film extraordinary is its attention to cumulative stress. There is no single defining mission. Instead, there are endless patrols, false alarms, long nights, and moments where impossible decisions must be made in seconds. When mistakes happen, the consequences are final, and the guilt lingers far longer than the danger itself. Action scenes are brief and disorienting, emphasizing confusion rather than spectacle. What lingers are the quiet aftermaths: officers staring into nothing, conversations cut short, fatigue settling into routine. Unlike many war films of its era, The Cruel Sea acknowledges psychological damage without labeling it. There are no speeches about trauma. Instead, it shows how responsibility accumulates, how command isolates, and how survival itself can feel like a burden. Leadership is not portrayed as noble certainty, but as the ability to continue functioning under unbearable weight. This film isn't overlooked because it lacks quality. It's overlooked because it refuses comfort. And that refusal is precisely why it stands as the finest and most truthful British war drama of the 1950s. These films remind us that Britain's greatest war dramas weren't about spectacle, but survival, quiet courage, moral doubt, endurance without applause. If you're tired of war movies that shout, rediscover these and listen closely. Some of the most honest stories were told softly, and they still echo today.